Rivalry weekend is behind us, and after a rivalry week filled with intensity, chaos, upsets, and in many of the games, extracurricular post-game activities, we now look ahead to week 15 of the college football season, conference championship week, and by this time next week, we will know the 12 teams competing in the first ever 12-team college football playoff. Johnny Sports Network here to provide you with my Week 15 college football predictions. And we have 5 conference championship games on the docket this week. These are without a doubt the 5 important games of the week. Very quickly, I do want to paint the playoff picture a little bit. Teams that are in 100% no matter what happens this weekend: Oregon, Texas, Penn State, Notre Dame, Georgia, Tennessee, Indiana, Ohio State. Win and you're in. UNLV and Boise State. The winner of that game will represent the group of 5 in the college football playoff. Iowa State, Arizona State in the Big 12 championship game. Clemson and SMU in the ACC championship game. I've seen some people say that SMU should be in, but I do think if SMU loses, I think they will be left out. And teams that are hanging on by a thread: Miami, Alabama, Ole Miss, and South Carolina. It's going to be very important to pay attention to what the committee rankings will look like tomorrow. Because what the rankings look like tomorrow, I do feel is going to be a tone setter for this week. Because Miami, they did lose to unranked Syracuse on the road. And how does the committee view that loss compared to 3-loss SEC teams, Alabama and Ole Miss? South Carolina, I was leaning towards them being left out of the playoff and out of the discussion, but I do think they have 2 silver linings. One is if Clemson were to win, then South Carolina can say, we have a head-to-head win against a conference champion. And if Texas wins, then Alabama and Ole Miss can't say, well, we have a head-to-head win against a conference champion. And Alabama and Ole Miss, they have the argument that we have a head-to-head win against South Carolina, who's also in question. And if Georgia wins, then Alabama and Ole Miss, they have the argument of we have a head-to-head win against a conference champion. If both of them don't win, then South Carolina, they're completely out of the picture if they aren't already. Which is why it's very important to check in on the rankings tomorrow night. What does Week 15 have in store for us? Without further ado, let's get to the Week 15 college football predictions right here on the Johnny Sports Network. Game 1 on the docket this week: UNLV and Boise State in the Mountain West Championship game. The winner of this game will represent the group of 5 in the college football playoff. So essentially, this is a playoff game. And this is a rematch from October 25th, where Boise State won by a score of 29-24. Boise State running back Ashton Jeanty, who, by the way, should be the Heisman Trophy winner, he had 128 rushing yards on 33 carries and a touchdown. This was one of Ashton Jeanty's worst performances of the year, and you can argue that it was his worst performance of the year. They do say that it is hard to win against the same team multiple times in one season. UNLV, they are 7th in scoring offense, scoring an average of 38.7 points per game. Boise State is 3rd in scoring offense, scoring an average of 40.6 points per game. Running back Ashton Genty, 2,288 rushing yards this season, leading the FBS, and he is 341 rushing yards away from breaking Barry Sanders' record for most rushing yards in a single season. UNLV, they are 10th in run defense, allowing an average of 101.1 rushing yards per game. They held Ashton Genty to 128 rushing yards, which, based off of how great of a running back Ashton Genty is, that is impressive, as Oregon gave up more rushing yards to Ashton Genty in week 2. UNLV, they are plus 14 in turnover margin, which is 5th in the FBS. Boise State, they are 5th in total offense, averaging 478.2 yards per game. They are 6th in third down conversion percentage, converting on third down 50% of the time. And Boise State, they are 2nd in the FBS in team sacks. And I am going to pick Boise State to win this game, as much as it is difficult to have a win against the same team twice in a year. And UNLV has had an impressive season with the obstacles they overcame early in the season. Their quarterback entering the transfer portal, and then he makes a statement saying it was NIL related, and the team rallied around each other, and they're in conference championship weekend. I think we're in for a good game, but I just think Ashton Genty, I think he's motivated, and he has one final chance to show the Heisman voters why he deserves the Heisman Trophy. I think he has a big night for the Broncos. Iowa State and Arizona State in the Big 12 championship game. And before I go any further, I want to give a lot of credit to both coaches in this matchup. Matt Campbell for Iowa State, I have felt for the longest time he is underrated and doesn't get talked about as much as he should. Overall, as a head coach so far, he is 98-65. And before he got to Ames, Iowa State was known as a team that wasn't good, but could potentially pull off an upset when you least expect it. And with Matt Campbell, Iowa State, they have an appearance in the New Year's Six, a New Year's Six victory, and this season with a chance to go to the college football playoff. Kenny Dillingham for Arizona State, an impressive turnaround, as Arizona State, they were projected to finish last in the Big 12. And I think this season, I do think it is a sign of better things to come for Kenny Dillingham. And I think his upside, I feel like within the next decade or so, he could potentially be one of the best head coaches in all of college football with the way things are going right now. But on to the game at hand. Both teams, they are in the top 12 in time of possession. Iowa State 10th in time of possession, Arizona State 12th in time of possession. Iowa State, a very disciplined team, only 49 penalties they've accumulated this season, which is the 4th fewest in the FBS, and they only allow an average of 19.58 points per game on defense, which is 18th in the FBS, while Arizona State running back Cam Skattebo, 1,398 rushing yards this season, 8th in the FBS. And he is 2nd in the FBS in all-purpose yards, only behind Boise State running back Ashton Genty. I have gone against Iowa State multiple times this season, and each time they have proven me wrong. Last week, I did say if Iowa State was going to win against Kansas State, they would need to contain Kansas State's running game. And they did just that. They defended better against the run against Kansas State than I thought they would, given that Iowa State's flaw was their run defense. However, with Cam Skattebo, the best running back in the Big 12, I think he is going to be a little tough for Iowa State to defend, as I do think in a very close Big 12 championship game, Arizona State, they win by 3 points. I think it is that kind of game. I'll be surprised if it is a runaway game for either of these teams in what is essentially a playoff game given the win and you're in circumstances. Clemson and SMU in the ACC championship game. Clemson looking to get last week's loss to South Carolina at home out of their heads, as Syracuse's upset victory over Miami put Clemson in the ACC championship game, as only one of three Clemson's losses this season is in ACC play, and they take on SMU, one of the many teams who have flown under the radar this season and shocked the college football world. Clemson is 8th in total offense, averaging 465.7 yards per game. SMU, they are 21st in total offense, averaging 441.8 yards per game. SMU is 5th in scoring offense, scoring an average of 39.2 points per game. While Clemson, they are plus 14 in turnover margin, which is 5th in the FBS. And they are 5th in first down offense. SMU, a very undisciplined team, 101 total penalties accumulated on the year, which is the 4th most in the FBS. And as far as the playoff picture is concerned, with Miami's loss last week, with them now being a 2-loss team in the ACC, I do think if you are a Miami fan, I do feel like you are rooting for SMU in this game. As an SMU win, it takes Clemson out of the picture. It really hinders South Carolina's picture, which at this point in time anyway, it's not that much of a picture, which is why it's very important to see what the playoff committee does with their rankings tomorrow night. But when I look at this matchup, SMU completely flying under the radar this year, find themselves in the ACC championship game, which some people did say that SMU would be a dark horse in the ACC, as their schedule, it looked very favorable. While Clemson, there were a lot of question marks after the Georgia game in week 1, where they lost really bad, the bad loss in week 1, but then Clemson, they started to improve as the weeks went on. They had a speed bump against Louisville, but then going to the South Carolina game, they had won their other games convincingly, and they had a chance to rally late in that game and take the win back from South Carolina, but Cade Klubnik, he threw an interception in the red zone. I do feel like with the experience that Dabo Swinney has in the ACC championship game, I do think it is going to pay off. And I'm going to pick Clemson to pull off the upset. And I think with Clemson winning, depending on how the rest of the things play out this week, I think it helps South Carolina, and I think it is the final knockdown for Miami in their college football playoff hopes. Georgia and Texas in the SEC championship game, a rematch from October 20th, where Georgia won by a score of 30-15, a dominant win on the road for the Bulldogs, back when Texas was number 1. And in that game, both defenses, they did hold their own in it, as Georgia only had 285 yards of offense in that game. Texas with only 259 yards of offense in that game. What does the SEC championship game have in store for us? For starters, which Carson Beck are we going to see for Georgia in this game? As Carson Beck against ranked opponents this season, a completion percentage of 61.36%, 7 touchdown passes, and 7 interceptions. He is still 8th in the FBS in passing yards with 3,429 on the year. And Georgia's defense, they are 35th in total defense, allowing an average of 332.1 yards per game, which is not on the elite level that we have seen Georgia in these past few years. While Texas, defensively, they are perhaps the best in college football, as their second scoring defense only give up an average of 11.67 points per game, third in total defense, only allowing an average of 247.2 yards per game, and they're 14th in total offense, averaging 450.1 yards per game. The big question is, which quarterback is going to have the better game this matchup? More importantly, which Carson Beck we're going to see? As 7 of those interceptions ranked opponents, 3 of them were against Texas in the October 20th matchup. A combined 7 turnovers in that game, Texas having 4 of them, losing that turnover battle. And if Carson Beck does make mistakes, Texas is going to have to take full advantage of those turnovers. Last week, Texas, their offense should have scored a lot more points than what they did. 458 yards of total offense against Texas A&M and only have 17 points out of it. They have to take full advantage against Georgia this week if they are going to win this game. And I am going to say about this game, if the Carson Beck that played against Tennessee shows up, then I think Georgia's going to win. As Carson Beck, he does have momentum ever since the bad performance against Ole Miss last week in the 8 overtime victory. No matter what people say about the officiating of the game or either of the games that were involved with these two teams, Carson Beck, he did have a good performance. He did what he had to do to win the game, and that's all you can ask for at this point in the season. I am going to pick Georgia to win this game, and Georgia winning this game is going to be good news for Alabama, I do feel like, as Alabama, Ole Miss, those two with head-to-head wins over Georgia, that's good news for them, as they'll have the argument that they have a head-to-head win over the SEC champion Georgia, if that is what takes place. And I do think we're in for either a very high-scoring game or a low-scoring 17-13 slugfest of a game. And based off of the defenses played in the first game, I'm going towards the 17-13 slugfest. Closing things out with the game of the week, at least what I feel like is the game of the week, Penn State and Oregon. And I was not sure how to explain what I'm about to explain. I've had to think over it multiple times. But I do feel like that this game is for the number 1 seed in the college football playoff. If Oregon wins 100%, they're the number 1 seed in the college football playoff, no questions asked. But if Penn State wins, I think it's only a 95% chance that they're the number 1 seed. And the 5% is if Texas wins against Georgia. Because the committee, they may view that, and I think they will view that, as the loss to Georgia earlier in the year is now null and void. So the loss, it cancels it out with the win in the SEC championship, and then I think Texas would be the number 1 seed in that scenario. But if Georgia does take down Texas in the SEC championship game, then this game definitely becomes for the number 1 seed in the college football playoff. Penn State, they are 6th in scoring defense, only giving up an average of 14 points per game. Oregon, they are ninth in scoring defense, only giving up an average of 16.17 points per game. Penn State, fourth in total defense, only giving up an average of 266.8 yards per game. Oregon, seventh in total defense, only giving up an average of 283.8 yards per game. Penn State has only allowed 11 sacks this season, the seventh fewest in the FBS. Penn State tight end Tyler Warren, a absolute versatility player, Mr. Versatility. He is responsible for 22.61% of Penn State's production, and that's just from a stat standpoint. I feel like based off his just appearance and presence on the field, because we've seen him line up at center, at running back, at quarterback, wide receiver, tight end. We've seen him line up everywhere he can line up pretty much. I'd say his presence alone, I feel like, is responsible for perhaps maybe close to 35 or at the most maybe 40% of Penn State's total production. And Oregon's going to have a very, very challenging time to come up with a game plan to defending Tyler Warren this week. Penn State, they are seventh in run defense. However, in their one loss to Ohio State this season, they allowed 176 rushing yards against the Buckeyes. Oregon running back Jordan James this season, 206 carries on the year, 1,166 rushing yards, and 13 touchdowns, averaging 5.7 yards per carry. And Oregon, in the first two games of the season against Idaho State and Boise State, they had a slow start to the year. Only a 10-point victory against FCS Idaho. Then the next week, having to win on a game-winning field goal. Boise State, they had them on the ropes, but seeing how good of a team Boise State is right now, it's justifiable that they struggled in that game. But as the season went along, Dillon Gabriel got a lot better. In fact, Dillon Gabriel was my preseason Heisman Trophy pick. And Oregon, they have arguably the best receiving corps in college football. Perhaps only behind Ohio State, only because Ohio State has the best receiving corps every year anyways. At least arguably. With Evan Stewart and Tez Johnson. The current narrative going on for Penn State, and we all know it well. Penn State, they can win 9, 10 games a year, but they can't win against the big teams. Can't win the games that matter. And I do believe this is James Franklin's first time going up against Oregon, unless they play each other in a bowl game or a New Year's Six game that I don't remember at this point in time. But still, can James Franklin finally break through against one of the big teams in a game that matters? Oregon, without a doubt, looks like the number one dominant team in college football. And knowing Penn State's current narrative, I do think in a low-scoring game, I think it's going to play out very similar to Ohio State, Penn State a few weeks back. And I think in a low-scoring game, Oregon, they do get the victory, as Penn State, once again, they are unable to deliver in a game that matters. But luckily for Penn State, the 12-team playoff is now a thing, and as I said in the beginning, Penn State would be the biggest beneficiary of it. And that will do it for my Week 15 college football predictions. Comment your predictions down below. If you'd like my thoughts on any of the other 4 conference championship games this weekend that I did not cover, please leave in the comment section. I will give you a response. For those of you who tune in for the NFL picks, the Week 14 NFL picks will be up tomorrow. For those that don't tune in, enjoy the games this weekend. I hope you guys had a very great Thanksgiving. Until next time, Vegas is always watching.